real estate is heavily, heavily local driven.
Whenever you do travel, whenever you go into a different country, different market, you really do feel the authentic environment when you go to these places. And real estate is a massive part of that.
We don't want to manage a consulting firm. We want to consult. A repeat client are easier than a new client. Patience, I think, in terms of career growth, sometimes gets overlooked.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a company that works with professional services firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Keith Brenan. Keith is a principal and managing director of Weitzman Associates, a full-service real estate advisory firm with extensive expertise in assisting private equity, assisting private sector developers, pension and private equity funds, institutions and governmental agencies with both simple and complex real estate issues. They specialize in consulting on all property types, including residential, office, retail, hotel, condo-hotel, healthcare, industrial, mixed-use properties, waterfront properties, undeveloped land, subdivisions, and unique land uses, as well as non-conforming and special use properties. Keith, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be a conversation close to my heart, and that's real estate. My dad was in real estate. It's such a sector that expands into different areas of the world. Wherever you are, real estate is relevant, right? So I'm looking forward to this one. But for our guests and viewers out there who are listening in and don't necessarily know who Keith Brenan is, could you give a bit more of a brief background on your journey to where you are today and the current role you play in Weitzman?
Yeah, happy to do so. So I grew up actually in the hotel business. My father was in the general manager role of a number of hotels growing up. So myself, my brother and siblings got to learn firsthand what that meant, running around hotels, both in the front of the house and the back of the house, really understanding how those large operations worked. And into my academic studies, focused on that industry, came out of that journey and was really focused more on general real estate as a whole. And so that gave me a lot of exposure to the office world, the residential world, the retail world, and then continuously wrapped up within the hospitality world as well. I've actually been with Weitzman since I left my undergraduate studies. So I've had one job, if you will, my whole career, which is a little bit rare.
Yeah.
But yeah, and Weitzman has evolved significantly from a hyper-focused consultancy that was focused on valuation and advisory 25 plus years ago. We still have an evaluation arm to the property or to the firm, but it's much more encompassing in terms of just pure general consulting as it relates to all aspects of the real estate industry.
Sure. I love to hear all the journey that you're going through, and I think it's particularly interesting that you're a one-man company, or I should say a one-company man.
A one-company man, yes, exactly.
One-company man, yeah, 100%. I think that's, as you said, very rare in today's climate in terms of career opportunities and going into a place. So it does clearly is a testament to Weitzman as an organization as a whole. In terms of then, so from my understanding, Weitzman historically has only worked with domestic US clients, but you are currently expanding internationally, correct me if I'm wrong. What prompted this kind of global expansion and what have been the biggest challenges and opportunities arising from that?
Sure. So we are US based. We were a solo office for the first 28, 30 years of the firm's existence in New York City. And our work expanded throughout the country, reached all parts of the US. I opened up an office in Chicago in 2007, which allowed just some quicker access to all parts of the US. We had on occasion an international assignment or two, largely brought in by a domestic US based client that was looking at an opportunity overseas and wanted a fresh set of eyes. But again, that was one or two assignments, one or two increase every few years. Over the last 5 years, my business partner, Peter Bazzelli, and I have seen a lot more of an expansion and a lot more of a desire, new clients and existing clients to look beyond the reaches. And so a lot of that is within the Caribbean and Latin America. There's been a few opportunities in Europe as well, where we're able to come in and help the clients figure out where there might be opportunity, where there might be a different approach to growth, a different real estate strategy maybe to take. And at the end of the day, as you kind of alluded to earlier, real estate is a necessary entity, right? Whether it's where you work, you live, you play, you learn, there's a physical real estate space that is there. And there's not that much differences, once you cross a border. The economics might change, the property types might be slightly different, but at the end of the day, it's still physical space that needs to perform, whether you're the user or the owner.
I love that. In terms of the opportunities are becoming more and more prevalent as times have changed, as times are evolving. And I really wanted to start really by taking it back 5 years ago. And I'm sure you know what 5 years ago was. It was a traumatic time around the world. The pandemic came in, COVID dramatically changed many aspects of real estate, office space, regulations changing and things like that. Which of these changes do you see as permanent, and what have you seen as reverting back to pre-pandemic, pre-COVID levels?
It's a great question because I think there have been a lot of lessons learned, that's for sure. But I think it varies within each sector, right? I think from a residential perspective, we continue to see from the design community and the development community some changes that are evolving in terms of the evolution of single family homes, multifamily on the rental and the for sale side, flats, condos, etc., as well as the desire for households to have alternatives from a residential perspective, whether that's the family or the household that resides in an urban area having a bit of a retreat out in the countryside, or whether that's just the overall design about what some of the new built, purpose-built residences have as it relates to a workspace, wellness space within the home. I think that that's evolved on the residential side. On the retail, I think the operators of retail spaces have become much more efficient, and obviously they're still looking to participate both in the bricks and mortar, but also on an online presence. And so what does that mean in terms of your physical space? And then obviously, particularly in the US, the biggest issue is office space. And what do you need to do for that office to attract that worker, to make them come into the office, to make them feel welcomed, but also in certain states is make sure that that commute into the office is worth their while. And then from we'll call it the management of those firms, what are they doing to make sure that they can have that collaboration and that on-site involvement and not have everyone via Zoom, via online, via what have you.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting point, and it's a point that I really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper in terms of that office space element, because it's not just in the US. I can tell you from the UK, London as well. It's a big issue in the sense that there's not a lot of people going back into the office for a long enough period of time, and then you're seeing a lot of things in the news of certain disruptions being had in terms of actual investments and return on investments coming back into the funds that own these office spaces. In terms of innovative approaches, what are you seeing from developers to reimagine these spaces, trying to bring people back into the offices and trying to actually make it an attractive thing to be back in the office again?
Yeah, no, I think the first response that we saw was office developers trying to create amenity spaces, if you will, right? Get them out of their cubicle, out of their desk, out of their small office. And some approaches were the ping pong tables and the communal gathering spots, right? That kind of evolved into more hospitality-like amenities. The challenge, however, is an office manager is not necessarily accustomed to servicing those physical spaces. And so that's where we've seen this kind of merger of hospitality within those office-like environments in terms of providing services, providing amenities that the tenants will partake. But there's an understanding there that there's a bit of a different service level there. There's a bit of a different staffing. There's a bit of a different experience. And so that's where we've seen kind of the hospitality world merge into the office world. And it's not just on food and beverage or anything along those lines, but it's more wellness focused, it's more staffing focused, it's focused on what that office tenant needs. And sometimes it's within a large user, it's internal to that office space. And in other cases, with a multi-tenanted office building, it's what does the office manager and owner need to do to make sure that they're providing a bit of a curated experience to the office tenant, but not going too far where it becomes a cost burden and an operational challenge for the office building, right? So there's a little fine line between do we provide enough of a service and enough of an experience versus saying, we're going to become a 5-star hotel within an office. That's not going to work either.
Yeah, no, 100%. I actually really think that's an interesting point, especially when you talk about bringing ping pong tables in and pool tables and things like that. You're trying to create an environment, an experience, but obviously, if you go too far over the line, then it becomes more of a social gathering, right? It's like you're still there to work at the end of the day. In terms of then real estate in segments, more so looking at the luxury real estate segment, right? How has that evolved in recent years, and what trends are you currently seeing that might surprise a few people out there?
Yeah, I think what we've seen on the luxury residential side is that it's not so much the square footage, but it's how the square footage that people are buying or renting or using adapts to their lifestyle, right? So there's some flexibility in there, right? Flex rooms for one household might be used as an office space. For another household, it might be a wellness studio. For another household, it might be a kids' corner or a multi-generational type space. And I think the luxury aspect of things has changed in terms of a definition. It used to be something that, was very unique. And now I think it's something that's more experiential. It's more what can create the memory, what can create that experience that the grandkids, the parents, the grandparents are going to remember. And sometimes that's what's outside of the walls of that luxury residential space. And sometimes it's what's inside the walls in terms of creating spaces that are gatherings spots. It's not just if the primary bedroom has the best ensuite bathroom.
Yeah.
That's usually a private space for a variety of reasons. It's not something that can be shared, but we're starting to see where the design focus and the built focus is on where is the experiential areas of the residences that allow people to really gather and interact.
That makes a lot of sense. In terms of then, is that typically a trend you're seeing across all markets, or what are the trends you're currently seeing? What are the biggest trends you're currently seeing in the market in terms of real estate and all the segments in general? And obviously, it can be quite topical at the moment, especially what's going on with tariffs in the US and things like that. What are you currently seeing, and how does that affect the global market as well as the local market of the US?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is, it used to be to maximize the square footage at no matter what price point you were, right? Entry level, multifamily apartment living on up to luxury single family homes or condominiums. It was how do we maximize the square footage? But with construction costs where they are, both on the supply and on the labor side, you just can't build more and expect to get that price per square meter to support that price. So where we're seeing a lot of focus is to really make spaces efficient, to try to keep that cost per square foot or per square meter down, so that whether it's a rental environment or a for sale environment, it still can be accretive to the developer and to the owner.
Sure. And in terms of then, are there any specific international markets you're currently seeing that are particularly interesting or undervalued at the moment? I know that you're expanding globally, so you might have a better understanding of those different markets, but what are you currently seeing that might be interesting?
Yeah, I think there's two things there, and it's both on the hospitality and on the residential side.
Okay.
And that is, going back to an earlier theme we were talking about, where is there something that is unique, but it is in relatively quick order to get there. And that can be a drive-to market, that can be a fly-to market. As long as there's good airlift, people will get there. And if it's within a reasonable distance from a metropolitan area, people will be happy to drive to. But it goes back to that unique sense of place. And where can people feel, if it's from a hospitality perspective, a bit of a respite, a bit of a relaxing environment to get there, and they'll travel for that. And that also focuses on residential as it relates potentially to relocation. You're sitting in London, I'm in Chicago. We're more connected than we ever have been. And so, as long as there's the technology to kind of amplify and help that connection, it's great. And we're seeing that mix of business and leisure, kind of the leisure, if you will, where people are happy to go on a work trip, but they might buffer that with a day or two before and a day or two after that work event, and know that they're still connected, they can still get work done. And so we're seeing those types of locations from a destination perspective be highly, highly sought after. And the residential developers are following suit. The hospitality teams are also following suit because they know they can capture that consumer, whether they're a buyer of a home or a guest in a hotel.
I think that's really interesting, especially when I think about what's happened in the UK and even London, for example. As with any major city, the cost of living within a city is more expensive than anywhere else, but with more remote working being available, things like that, people are moving outside of the city, even places as far as what we would call Cornwall, which is a coastal city.
Yep.
Very quiet, people are moving there, and that way they're able to live a peaceful life but also have that city job to say, and they might go into the office once every 2 weeks, once a week, but then it makes it worthwhile, right? And so that kind of plays into what you mentioned there. In terms of then developers or investors looking to expand internationally or even locally, what are the most important factors that they should consider before entering into any new market in real estate?
Yeah, I think what we find is the fundamentals of real estate demand don't change too significantly from one market to another. What does change is land use, zoning, regulations, and a better understanding about what it means to build 20,000 square feet in one market versus build 20,000 square feet in another market, particularly when you cross the border, right? And so real estate is heavily local driven. And if our clients and the ones that we're working with that are looking to expand beyond the US, it's making sure that they have the right local partners that are aligned with them, both from a product perspective, but also a quality perspective and a market perspective, because that's where there's a lot of challenges when you get out of your market area that you develop. And it's not too different from a California-based developer looking into something on the East Coast of the US. Versus a California-based developer looking to go into the Caribbean or Latin America or Canada or beyond. You still need to have a very good understanding about what those local jurisdictions require and what the labor force and the market is like to actually develop and build.
It strikes me as there's a lot of commonalities between real estate in all sectors from what you're saying, especially looking at local markets and being locally driven, having local partners. It's that thing of saying, make sure you drive down the street before you buy the street, right? Just to give you an idea, and having local partners is one of the best ways of doing that. So tell me more about Weitzman. When you start working with a client, when a client starts an engagement with you, what does that look like for them? How is it that Weitzman helps your client to achieve what they're looking to achieve?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so at the end of the day, it goes back to the reason that this is my only firm I've ever worked for or with, in that we take it from a very entrepreneurial perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In today's day and age, a lot of our clients can Google, they can use ChatGPT, they can use AI to figure out some of the bigger picture questions, but we're there to figure out some things that they might not otherwise just be easily able to get. And part of that is leveraging the experience of the firm for 44 plus years and our track record and how we've approached some of these engagements. But also it's a better understanding about what are they actually looking for when they retain us. Are they looking for us to just check the box in terms of approve what they're thinking? That might be in some cases what the client needs. And if we have got a good understanding about what that path and that process is to help them get there, we'll customize our scope and our consulting services to reach that. More often than not, though, we're not there to just check the box. We're there to help prove out a business plan, prove out a market opportunity, and then help them strategize the best path forward to see that vision. Whether that's building 200 residential units, whether that's building a bespoke 5-star resort, whether that's converting an existing office building into another use. It's really getting into the weeds of the local market, the local demand sources, and understanding what the opportunity is, but also how do we mitigate risk. And at the end of the day, we're there to do two things effectively, is create value, maximize proceeds on the value creation side, but also to mitigate risk. And sometimes that risk is governmental and permitting. Sometimes that risk is a new product that hasn't been introduced into a marketplace, or just an entirely new vision about what real estate component can be. Or they might be building the same product in an existing marketplace that's full of that product. So what do they do to make that mousetrap, if you will, a little bit more attractive to the market? So at the end of the day, we're there to create value and to mitigate risk. They go hand in hand, but that's kind of our approach. And we can do that in a variety of ways, which makes my job on a day-to-day basis different and varied and fun, because no project is the same, no client is the same.
I think that's really interesting as well, because I speak to a lot of consultants and consulting firms, and they all say the same, is like, no 2 days are the same, no 2 projects are the same. It's because of the tailored nature of what you provide, you're able to have such a breadth of understanding on one specific sector, right? Are you able to share an example of a particularly interesting project that you've run where you've managed to create some tremendous value for the client?
Yeah, I think, we hope every project we create tremendous value for clients, but there's a few that stick out, right? In terms of, we had a client in a tertiary market in the US, a local stakeholder that had a very strong market position in that community based on their businesses that they were running at the time. They were a large employer, and they had a vision for what we'll call a mixed-use project at the corner of Main and Main, right in the heart of that metro area. But it was a smaller community, and they were trying to be all things for all people. They were having retail, they were having apartments, they were having a hotel, they were having some office space. But they were looking at it in terms of, well, if I put A and B and C and D together, it's going to create something that's magical, as opposed to just hyper-focusing on what those components are. And so sometimes it's, in this particular case, it was in the upper Midwest of the U.S., and it was restraining that development, bringing it back to the bare knuckles to say, no, you can't have multiple residential uses here. You have to focus on where that market is, and today that market is on the multifamily rental side, and so making sure that they bought into that. And then in certain cases, it's helping them simplify a business plan related to a real estate development so that it can be successful, and acknowledging that, if this starts out well, there's many more opportunities where you can build on to it, as opposed to having to push everything into the same box. Sure. And having one building meet all those needs. And so this was a few years ago. And since then, they were successful with the first building's introduction. And now they've been able to expand onto other sites in close proximity, really make a more robust downtown experience. And eventually they did add in all the other uses that they were contemplating, but now they've done it at a point where it's scalable and it's phased. Sure. And it's more appropriate.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense, and it reminds me of a lot of other principles that we speak about with most of our clients and partners, but I think you hear it in the marketplace as well. Things like riches in the niches, specialize, don't generalize. It's like getting a deep understanding of one sector, one specific area, becoming exceptional at that, and then going, okay, well, now we can now expand into different verticals, different markets, whatever it might be. And it seems like a tactic that it works in a lot of sectors, so it's always interesting to hear. I want to talk a little bit about business development. As someone that runs or is a leader of the organization, one of your primary roles, I imagine, is growing the business, right? One of the toughest things anyone can do, but one of the highest leverage activities you can do within the business. What has been your approach to building client relationships across different cultures, regions, as well as locally? What is it that you're doing? How is it that you're doing that?
Yeah, I think it's unique to our industry, right? We are solely focused on the real estate world. And the benefit that we have within that real estate world is that there's so many participants in that industry, whether it's the architects or the engineers, whether it's the legal teams, the financial groups, lenders and equity investors per se, right? Every project has a multitude of people that are involved. And so one focus that my business partner, Peter Brazzelli, and I have had is to always make sure that we are leveraging those relationships with everyone that is involved on a singular project. And so we have been fortunate enough to be able to rely on that word of mouth, rely on that referral, rely on that repeat business perspective, because an architect might be working on a project in Seattle on one day, and they're in Miami the next day, and they're in London the day after that. And so how can we help them with their clients? How can we help the financial teams, the legal teams, the operational teams, the management teams as well? And so that we try to position ourselves where, even if it's a quick consult for an hour or two, it's value add to their work. And so we really try to, from a business development perspective, make sure that we remain in constant contact and involvement and engagement with, it might be one project, but there were probably 7 or 8 or 10 different teams that were involved in that project. And so how can we stay to the forefront? How can we help them be successful so that when they do have a need where we can come in and help, they're more than willing to reach out because they know we're happy to.
Sure. It strikes me as a long-term approach to growth, right? Understanding that, leveraging your relationships, but also providing value to be able to go, okay, well, you've provided someone with value with a referral or word of mouth. And as the universe works, reciprocity comes into play, and you hope that things naturally come your way as well. So I think that's really interesting.
Part to that is also making sure our staff understands that too, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Making sure that whether you're at the entry level or you're the mid-level of the firm, that you have the authority to spend a few hours that might not be billable to make sure that your client or that your colleague within an existing project understands that you're there to help, right? And so if you can emphasize that, it doesn't have to be the senior partners that are the only ones doing business development perspective. It's also making sure your staff is not incentivized per se, but is knowledgeable that we want them on occasion to spend an extra hour or 2 or 3. We don't want them to spend 2 or 3 days, but we want them to spend an extra hour or 2 or 3 to help out so that when there is an opportunity for us to come in and actually be engaged, there's already a pre-existing relationship.
For sure. And I think, yeah, the point you made there, you want business development to be permeating through every layer of the organization, right? And when it does, then that compounding effect does really come into play. And also, in terms of career opportunities as well, if the better you get at business development, the more you learn from a younger period of time in your career, it can really help when it comes to just moving up the ranks to be able to have those networks and leverage those contacts that you have. It gives you a real opportunity to rise up the ranks.
I think on top of that, not only that, but from we are a relatively small boutique firm, but we now have hundreds of alumni of folks that started at a mid-level or an early level and have moved on to other opportunities, the vast majority of which are in the real estate industry. And so we're very proud to say that many of our clients are former employees, right? So that kind of, from a business development perspective, that's a great testament. I think if someone leaves after 3, 4, or 5 years with you and you're happy to see them along because you've given them that path of growth, but when they come across an issue that a consultant can help with, we want to be their first choice. And we see that often.
I can imagine. Looking ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, obviously, and we experienced a massive change 5 years ago in markets, and we probably cannot anticipate another seismic event like that. But looking ahead 5 to 10 years from now, what major shifts do you anticipate in global real estate markets, if any, and how would you approach it?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift, and this is going to sound odd to say this as we sit here on April 10th with what's going on in the world today, but I do believe that we have become far more global and we will continue to be more global. There will continue to be, despite some headwinds against it right now, the need from a society perspective, but as well as from a business perspective and as well as from a human perspective, to be more interconnected. So again, a little challenging to say this in April 10th of 2025. The connectivity amongst nations from a business perspective, from a trade perspective, despite what's going on right now, we think is going to be paramount, right? And a lot of that is based on physical spaces, whether it's industrial or whether it's hospitality or whether it's places of commerce. And so where we see a lot of those trends is making sure that there's some authenticity to the real estate. When you wake up in the Middle East and you're going to a business meeting or you're in a hospitality environment, you want to understand that you are in the Middle East. You're not in New York. When you're in a national park in Canada, you want to make sure you have a physical space around you that is aligned with that. And so there's reasons people travel to go experience different things, and there's some of that is that authenticity about where they're going. And so we think that, one of the key factors that we focus on is making sure that the real estate that we're involved in is authentic to the location and to the use. And I think that's going to be ever more important going forward, no matter whether you're there from a residential perspective, a hospitality perspective, an office perspective. But we want to travel. We want to learn new things. We want to experience new experiences. And you can't do that if you're only within the confines of your existing space.
Couldn't agree more, especially whenever you do travel, whenever you do go into a different country, different market, you really do feel the authentic environment when you go to these places. And real estate is a massive part of that. Whether you go to a resort or whether you go to a market, a local market, like that, the real estate is very much the experience that you have and how you feel. So I think it's really interesting. In terms of then, and this is a little bit more topical, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, right? AI is one of the most topical things in the world, and obviously real estate is very much a physical thing, right? And AI is very much a digital thing. In every one of our podcasts, we touch on AI and understanding different sectors and how it can or will affect the sector, if it will at all. So I want to gather your thoughts and pick your brains on that. In terms of, is it evolving your consulting approach? Is it evolving the way investors analyze markets? How is AI being utilized in real estate?
Yeah, I think of all the industries, there's a bit of a old timer view on real estate, right? It's static, it's not quick to adapt and to modernize. But I do think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunities and risks associated with AI. In fact, I flew overnight back into Chicago this morning from a conference in Arizona where AI was brought up in seminars that had nothing to do initially with AI. But there was always that overriding theme about where is the interaction and how do we either stop it if it's viewed as a deterrent or a problem, or how do we enhance it if it's viewed as a solution? And this was a market in Phoenix where you've got Waymo, which are driverless cars zooming around the city at all times. This is a market where there are new construction materials that are being computer driven and AI driven. And so I think it's a vital part of the real estate industry moving forward. It also allows for a lot of collaboration, whether it's on the early design side or whether it's on the early concept side. But I think there has to be some understanding that when physical spaces are being created in the real estate world, it really is more focused on the humanity of it, as well as, how can it be more efficient or more effective if there's an AI tool in some way, shape, or form.
Fantastic. Keith, this section of the podcast we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room. And it's a series of questions we ask all of our viewers and all of our guests. And it gives our viewers and listeners an opportunity to really understand how a business owner, a leader, thinks and acts within the business. So the first question I always like to ask at this stage of the podcast is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of the business?
That's a good question, and it's probably a question that I should reflect on more. Right. But I think the first and foremost is, as a consultancy, the only thing that we can offer is ourselves and our staff. And so it's making sure that our staff feel comfortable, they feel equipped, and they have the necessary resources that they can rely on, whether that's their peers or whether that's third-party resources and data collection and other opportunities. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that our staff feels comfortable to execute as a consultant. And so that's, I think, is our number one primary focus. Going back to an initial topic that we had on this chat here, we are changing our physical environment in our offices, both in New York and in Chicago. And that's largely to make sure that, one, we are in office, but it's also to make sure that that in-office experience is beneficial. And it's not just cubicles and fluorescent lights and small cramped spaces, but it's rather a little bit more immersive and a little bit more collaborative. And so, I think at the end of the day, as a consultancy, we're only as good as our team. We're not creating a product. We're not doing widgets. We are just ourselves. And so the first task is for us to make sure that our staff is comfortable.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The value you're providing is the expertise of your staff, right? And so they are your number one way of being an organization. So I completely agree with that. In terms of, as a leader, you have to run the business, right? You have to look at specific metrics. You have to understand what's going on within the organization. What metrics matter most to you within the business? What is it that you're always looking at that and going, no, this is what I need to be focusing on. This is what matters.
Yeah, it's very relevant and topical as we've worked through some new project management software and tools internally for us, right? And so it's not hours per week per employee. That's not the metric we're looking at. It's more of efficiency and effectiveness and reaching goals on a timely basis. And so, it's not as if in some cases it might require an employee to work 60 hours in a week. And you might think, oh, why did they have to spend 60 hours? Well, they needed to because of a client requirement or a deadline or whatever that case may be. But it's also making sure that that person or persons aren't working 60, 70, 80 hours each week. But they also have the understanding that, okay, we went above and beyond last week. I'm going to skip out early on a Friday and enjoy the spring weather. It hasn't quite hit yet here, but right. And so it's making sure that from a metric perspective, it's not just hours per week and billable hours and that, but it's rather making sure that we have a good understanding about the ebbs and flows of that space. And then the biggest metric really that we're really focused on is, and it's something relatively simple to measure, is client satisfaction. Did we exceed their thoughts in terms of when they entered into a particular engagement? And did we provide value that they didn't have before? And in some cases, that's keeping them from doing projects. That's telling them that we're a bit leery about this because of certain risks and certain uncertainties. And in many cases, that's a good metric to have because they might have not been the result they were expecting, but they appreciated the fact that we kind of kept them out of harm's way, or we changed the path in which they were looking to deliver.
Makes a lot of sense. In terms of then the growth of Weitzman, and it's an organization that's been around for, I think you mentioned 45 years. You've been at the firm for 25 years. How are you currently growing the business? Obviously now you from nationally, you're expanding globally. What kind of business development activities are you doing? Are you going to conferences? Are you leveraging, as you mentioned already, your network? But what other activities are you doing in terms of business development for growth?
Yeah, everyone wants growth, and we're no different. Right? Growth on the bottom line and growth in projects and growth in experiences. But one of the unique tenets of Weitzman is that, and in particular for Peter Bazzelli and myself, my business partner, we don't want to manage a consulting firm. We want to consult. And there's a fine line if we grow in terms of headcount, where we are no longer engaged with our clients. We're no longer working on projects. We then become managers of people. And so we've been very cognizant of trying to keep the headcount to a relatively simple level that enables us to actually be in the field with our clients and be working on projects, yet still looking to grow. And so the one approach to that is collaboration. Who are we working with that can, whether it's on the design side, whether it's on the finance side, whether it's on the development side, where we can collaborate with folks. So it's not all the resources are put into the Weitzman bucket, but it lets us expand our client base. It lets us expand our geographic reach. And if we're able to structure it appropriately, I do think we can structure it appropriately, it grows the revenue side, right? And so that's really becoming more of a collaboration perspective. And in that sense, we're not doing it where we're only going to work with one firm on residential sales and marketing, or only one firm on a hospitality company. It's more of being open and collaborative to a number of different opportunities.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting because that approach really does allow you to remain boutique, and it allows you to remain boots to the ground, kind of understanding, and also it lets you continue to do what you love to do, right? And I'm sure you went in and you love to consult, right? And so it allows you to have those opportunities more consistently. All right, so in terms of you've been in business now in Weitzman for 25 years, you and your business partner have been running the organization for a while. What are the biggest lessons you've learned? And I'm sure there's been many, so I won't ask you to list all of them, but what's the biggest lesson you've learned whilst running the organization?
I think it's understanding where you can help and where you can't. I think in some cases we've tried to be the end-all solution for everything, and that's not the benefit, right? So it's having a bit of a humble nature to say, look, we can't take you to the next level, but we can introduce you to other people that can. And that might be on the design side, that might be on a construction side, there's a number of different elements in the real estate world where we aren't that expert, but it's also saying, okay, well, that's a particular need that you might need as our client. We don't have that expertise, so let us figure out who does and make that introduction, as opposed to saying, oh no, we'll figure it out, right? I think that's probably a lesson that we've learned a few times over, is just to make sure that it's in our client's best interest to pass the ball, if you will, and let them go down a different path, because we aren't that solution for them.
Absolutely. And it protects the relationship as well, doesn't it? Because if you say you can do it, you don't necessarily do as good a job as you had been doing. That relationship, it can go, oh, I don't trust you necessarily with that, and it doesn't work as well. Whereas if you have an element of going, well, we can't help you here, but someone else does, there's more respect in that relationship. There's more of a trust in that relationship that's built. And that can be very helpful.
A repeat client is
exactly.
far easier than a new client, right?
Absolutely.
So exactly.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Final question, Keith. I like to end every podcast with this question. If you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that be?
This is somewhat selfish, but I would say the retention of young professionals. I think a lot of folks think that if they're not jumping companies and trying to jump up the ladder, they're falling behind. And it's somewhat specific to those guys and gals and the sort that are in their 20s. Patience, I think, in terms of career growth sometimes gets overlooked. And so if there would be one thing that I could wave that magic wand, and it would be to say, yes, you've been with us for 2 years. Yes, you're a very successful person and you will be incredibly successful in the future. Don't feel rushed to go out the door. You're going to learn more. And then from that perspective, we as Weitzman are more than happy to help you with that career growth. But if you're here for 12, 18, 24 months, you haven't earned the right to jump ship yet, right? So you've got a lot more to learn, and don't take that job that you might think is aspirational, because you still need a bit of footwork. So I think that would be the only comment, that younger professionals having an understanding that patience and more knowledge and more experience is going to help them longer than just jumping ship.
Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. For all our viewers and listeners who want to find where you are, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, of course, more prevalent now than I've been in the past, and weitzmanusa.com. TZ.com is our email or our website, and I'm readily available to chat all things real estate.
Fantastic. Well, Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your insights and everything. It's been a great conversation. Yeah, hopefully speak to you soon.
Great. All right. Thanks, Syed. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.